In my 20s, I worked at a nonprofit in Vermont, leading statewide leadership trainings for youth. And in my 5th year, a new executive director arrived, and as we were planning the statewide conference, he kind of just sat back and didn't really offer much guidance and just wanted to see how and what we did. And on the day of the conference, over 500 youth from across the state joined us, and there were youth staff, and there were youth speakers, and the adults knew how to sit on their hands and let the youth lead. High school kids don't want to go to a training where adults talk about leadership. They want to hear it from one another. And I was so proud that we had forged relationships with youth and adults who were willing to try that out and see what happens as they lead and learn. And so the next week, I went to work and I saw I had an email in my inbox from my new boss, and I was really excited to open this up to get all the gold stars of approval and all this praise, right? Well, that is not what happened, friends. He expressed disappointment, and he listed the issues that he believed we should have handled differently. I was livid. He had not shared any expectations when we were planning. He sat there quietly. We welcomed his participation. He said nothing. He only named them afterwards, and not only that, but in a lengthy email. Can I just say, if you are ever sending an email and it's more than like 8 lines, you should really say to yourself, this is an in-person conversation. Nothing good ever comes from lengthy emails. Never. I was not impressed. In my assessment, this was a demonstration of my new boss's lack of leadership and supervisory skills. And I wasn't sure why he was chosen to lead our organization that was about leadership. I was so disappointed, and it was keeping me up at night. I was having angry dreams. I was waking up angry. I'm not a super angry person. And so I realized, oh man, I've learned from the 12 steps that resentment is like drinking poison, hoping someone else will die. And so even though I had never confronted a supervisor before, I decided I had to talk with him directly or I was going to keep drinking poison. So thankfully, I had been introduced to NonViolent Communication the summer before he arrived. Fortuitous. And I decided to look over my notes from that workshop and to look at their conflict resolution model and to do some writing so I could get really succinct and prepare myself, because I was charged. And in those moments, it's not easy to remember to begin again in love and to make those choices to care and to share and to bring about the world we want to see. And so for me, I had this written down, and I had it in my pocket, and I was like holding on to it, to just hold on to my integrity. And I wrote something like, Larry, when you shared feedback after the conference about what you had wanted to happen at the conference, I felt surprised and frustrated and angry. My needs for communication and clear shared expectations were not met. Would you be willing to meet with me before the next program to share your expectations and discuss your ideas? And that's like all I said. Sure, I had plenty of other things I wanted to say, right? But more than anything, I loved my job. I loved it. I had been in it for 5 years, even though I only made $24,000 a year. I loved this job. Also, I worked 32 hours a week and 10 months a year, and that was awesome. I was young and living in Vermont. But I wanted it to go well, and I actually wanted to live up to the expectations that I had of him for how do we deal with conflict. So if I'm going to be the change I want to see in the world, then I have to actually choose that. And so that's what I shared, and I'm grateful for his response. He said, I'm impressed that you came in here and talked to me directly, and that you said what you had to say without lots of drama or emotion. It's like you think like a man. Just cleansing waterfall image. Bless him. May Larry find all of the peace and self-love and joy and serenity that I seek for myself. This is also what I've been taught to do when I resent someone. Take care of my own boundaries, but then pray for them that they find all of the blessings that I want for myself. And wow, does it work? Has anyone tried it? Yeah, it totally works. It's a beautiful thing. It's a great practice for living the life I want to have. What I say, what I do, affects how I dream, how I wake up, how my relationships are. It all affects my ability to be comfortable in my own skin. So if I keep festering these ideas about what's wrong with Larry and all of Larry's mistakes, then that's what I'm giving myself. And so instead, I'm so grateful for the tool of nonviolent communication to help me refocus, not on analyzing and judging other people, but on recognizing what are my feelings and my needs so that I can speak to them instead of to someone else's faults. And I'm actually grateful now for how Larry responded, because sadly, my dissatisfaction at work, over time, it helped me go and do the thing I really didn't want to do, which was leave Vermont and go to theological school. I wasn't grateful at the time, but I can honestly say now that I am so grateful I did that. And I'm grateful that I had the chance to practice showing up in my own life with the kind of skills and the kind of integrity that I always want to have, and yet no one taught me this. I didn't grow up learning, how do you deal with conflict and disagreement with other people? How do you deal with that in a community where we have all these different opinions that we still show up with and begin again in love, and that we show up affirming the worth and dignity of others, including those who've just said you think like a man, right? And so I wasn't graceful, really, in my beginning practices of this, and I can still not be graceful, but I want to show up with more skill and care in my relationships, because I don't want to be Penelope Rex. I can sometimes be Penelope Rex, where I want to eat my classmates, where I really don't want my behaviors to undermine what I ultimately want, which is connection and belonging and comfort in my own skin, because I'm acting with integrity and kindness. But there are times where I just read it like, you're not actually another person, you're just a delicious snack for my resentment, and so I'm going to breathe fire all over you. But in the foreword to the Nonviolent Communication book written by Marshall Rosenberg, he shares this story. The foreword is actually written by Gandhi's grandson, Arun Gandhi. And he talks about growing up in South Africa in the 40s. And he says that during apartheid, and he says that when he was 10 years old, he was beat up by white people for being too black. And then he was beat up by black people for being too white. And that he didn't know how to deal with this. And so his parents sent him to India to spend time with his grandfather to learn how to deal with his most understandable rage about what was happening to him. And he said that his grandfather taught him that we often think we ourselves are not violent if we aren't hitting people, if we aren't starting wars, if we're not killing. But violence comes in other forms. And his grandfather had him reflect on his day each night. They would sit down together in his bedroom and they would look at what had happened, and they made a tree on the wall where they would write down what had been physical violence and what had been passive violence, which is where it involves more of emotional hurt. And he said within a month, an entire wall was covered with the passive violence. And his grandfather said, see how often the physical violence is the result of all of that passive violence? It is all violence. And we can look to see this in ourselves and seek to bring about the change we wish to see in the world by choosing a different way. Those are actual real choices. That quote can be hard for me to reconcile. Like, how do I take my daily lived experience and tie it into this changing the world with the way that I act? But I experience a shift. In the reading, Sherry Huber talked about if we don't understand projection and we just think that the world we're creating in our moment-to-moment lived reality, if we actually think that's what everyone else is experiencing, then we've created the world with our thoughts. And if I change my thoughts, then actually I am changing my experience of the world. In NVC, Rosenberg says there are two things that distinguish truly nonviolent actions from violent actions. First, there is no enemy in the nonviolent point of view. You don't see an enemy. Your thinking is clearly focused on protecting your needs, caring for your needs. And second, your intention is not to make the other person suffer. All of our movies are about justice equals revenge. That the only way to move forward is to finally get that person to suffer and to feel the way that you feel for what they caused you. Booker T. Washington said, "You can only hold a man down if you stay down on the ground with him." When we decide that the way to resolve something is first to have an enemy and to have that person suffer, then we are choosing violence. We are choosing to drink the poison, hoping someone else will die. Whatever you do in your life, whatever you practice, is what you get. Rilke said, "Perhaps everything which is terrible, in the deepest sense, is something that wants our love." When I'm Penelope Rex, I'm just trying to satisfy a need. I'm just not doing it in a very successful way. People only get upset with one another because we care, because what we do actually matters. And we can let go of our need to blame and to analyze by placing our focus instead on our own feelings and our needs. We can focus not on punishing another person, but on actually taking care of ourselves by focusing on our needs and our feelings. This conflict resolution model is printed in your order of service. It focuses on 4 parts, on observation. It's in the sermon section. It's focusing on observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And this is like many other models of conflict resolution, but I find the larger context in which it is situated to be essential. Because if I go in there saying, "Larry, when you shared your expectations in a lengthy email, after the conference was over, I felt angry." That is not nonviolent. That is actually hoping to punish, right? That's actually, in this sense of Aikido, losing my connection with the universe by trying to dominate. And this is so countercultural. This is so countercultural. This is such a practice that we have to choose. It's not something for many of us that comes naturally. It just doesn't. But this is where our faith and our lives intersect. This is where we're called to begin again. We are always going to see things differently. We're going to interpret things differently. But how do we begin again in love, in relationship? I offer this tool, and I want to offer some workshops around it. So we have some skills to treat each other the ways that we know we can and that we want to. The observations are concrete things that a video camera would record. We don't put in any evaluations, any analysis. The feelings are about how we feel and what we observe. And if you ever hear someone say, "I feel that," blah, 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 that's not a feeling, right? Feelings are mad, sad, glad, shame, fear. They're not that. Anything that's, "I feel that," is usually a thought. "I feel that you're undermining me. I feel that you don't respect me. I feel angry, and my need for respect isn't being met." I don't know how many of you learned that in couples counseling, but when you say the thing that you really want, if you say the need underneath it and what it means to you, you're so much more likely to get someone's responsive care instead of feeling defensive and judged and blamed. Nobody likes that. So we can then make requests that are concrete actions for the person to respond in a way. You can't just say, "What I want from you in the future is respect." What does that mean? What would that look like? And when I used this model with my boss, I invited him into connection. I had plenty of thoughts telling me it would be great to just eat him for my snack. But I was authentically curious about what would my life be like if I try to use these tools? I know what doing things the same way gets me, because I've done it so many times. What can be different if I actually am willing to try something new? Rosenberg writes, every moment each human being is doing the best we know how at that moment to meet our own needs. We never do anything that is not in service of a need. This is one of the most controversial things that people talk about, that he says, that everything we do is in service of meeting one of our own needs. And he says, on the level of needs, there's no conflict in the world. It's also one of the more controversial statements, but imagine that. If in the moment, in a conversation with someone, and we become aware of our needs, and we listen underneath what they're saying for their feelings and their needs, and we allow space that all of our needs could be met, that it's not an either or. He says we all have the same needs. The problem is our strategy for meeting the needs. I don't know about you, but I know my strategies can be problematic. When I fell in love for the first time at the age of 16, I definitely had strategies that created conflict. I'm proud to say I have new strategies now. Years later, that high school boyfriend, my first sweetheart, his mom was still making jokes about things I had said in the driveway during some of our late night fights. I remember saying things that I would hear in love songs, which if you ever hear yourself say something you hear in a love song, you're just like, whoa. Not the most healthy choices there. But I would say things like, well, if you really loved me, and I really did expect that the world that I understood, it's like, well, if you loved me, you wouldn't do this. I had no idea that I was projecting my understanding of the world onto him. I caused so much suffering. Marshall Rosenberg calls this emotional slavery. And he writes about how we can achieve emotional liberation. Emotional slavery is when we feel responsible for how someone else feels. So when they tell us they're upset, it's like, oh no, I'm bad. I've done something wrong. So we avoid it. We don't want to have the conversation. He says the next phase is we realize, I can't make you think or feel anything. But we can be obnoxious about it. You can be like, that's not my problem. I hear that you're upset. We're not emotionally liberated if we can't tap into compassion when someone is telling us that they're hurt. He says that conflicts, even of long-standing duration, can be resolved if we just keep the flow of communication going, in which people come out of their heads and stop criticizing and analyzing each other, and instead get in touch with our own needs. And we listen for the needs of others. We realize the interdependence that we all have in relationship to each other, and that we can't win at somebody else's expense. We can only fully be satisfied when the other person's needs are fulfilled as well as our own. Not only are we more likely to get our own needs met in that moment, but also in the long run. That it's not just about that moment with Larry or the person standing in front of us. It's about the practice of living the life that I want to have. And when we take care of ourselves and we invite others to connect with us, especially when we're feeling hurt or feeling angry and our need for respect or understanding have not been met, when we invite people to connect with those needs and with us, we nurture the kind of world we want to live in, and we become the change that we actually wish to see. May we be so willing. Amen.